Young gardener Malik Johnson thought it was just another ordinary workday at the old Southern estate until he found its owner Henry Ellison collapsed beside a forgotten grave. Malik carried the old man into the house and cared for him through the night. Worried and restless, Henry couldn't stop wondering why the boy seemed so familiar. But when Malik wiped the dirt off the tombstone the next day, he uncovered a secret that would turn his entire world upside down. Before we continue, tell us what time it is and where you're watching from. And subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. The Georgia sun hadn't yet burned off the morning mist when Malik Johnson pushed his rusted shopping cart down Maple Street. 20 years old, with calloused hands that belonged to someone twice his age, he moved with the quiet efficiency of a man who'd learned early that survival didn't wait for anyone. His cart rattled with the day's findings: aluminum cans, copper wire stripped from an abandoned warehouse, a dented toolbox someone had left by the curb. Each item had a price. Each price bought another week of his mother's medication. Malik's apartment was 3 miles away, in the section of town where the streetlights stayed broken and the pavement cracked like dried earth. His mother, Sarah Johnson, lay in the back bedroom, her breathing labored even in sleep. The doctors said her lungs were scarred from years working in the textile mill back when there still was a mill before it closed and took half the town's jobs with it. He dropped out of school at 16. Not because he wanted to, but because someone had to work. Someone had to keep the lights on. Someone had to choose between his future and his mother's present. It wasn't really a choice at all. "Malik," a voice called from across the street. He looked up to see Mrs. Patterson waving from her porch. She was one of the good ones, always saved her cans for him, never looked at him like he was invisible the way some folks did. "Got a bag for you, honey." On the side porch. "Thank you, ma'am." He meant it. Kindness was rare enough to be treasured. By noon, Malik had made his way to the nicer part of town, where the houses had names instead of numbers. Oak Haven, Riverside Manor, Maple Hollow. These weren't just homes, they were statements, reminders of a world Malik could observe but never enter. He was sorting through a pile of yard waste behind a coffee shop when he heard footsteps approaching. "Excuse me, young man." Malik turned to find an elderly white woman standing there, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a simple gray dress and sensible shoes. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes were sharp, assessing. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Nora Whitfield. I manage the Maple Hollow estate." She paused, studying him. "I've seen you around town. You do yard work, don't you?" Maple Hollow. The name stirred something in Malik's memory, faint, like an old photograph left too long in the sun. His mother and grandmother used to mention it sometimes, their voices dropping low when they did. The famous old mansion on the hill. He remembered his grandmother's face changing whenever someone brought it up, remembered how she'd go quiet, her eyes distant and sad. Eventually, the family just stopped talking about it altogether. Malik straightened, wiping his hands on his worn jeans. "Yes, ma'am. Whatever needs doing, cutting grass, clearing brush, hauling. I work hard." Nora nodded slowly. "The property has been neglected. The gardens are overrun. Mr. Ellison, the owner, he hasn't had the energy to maintain it himself. I'm too old to do it alone." She pulled a piece of paper from her pocket. "This is the address. Can you come by tomorrow morning? $6 an hour. Cash. $6 an hour. For a week's work that could cover his mother's prescriptions and maybe, just maybe, leave enough for groceries that weren't past their sell-by date. I'll be there, ma'am. 6 a.m. That will do." Nora's expression softened slightly. "Bring work gloves if you have them. The brush is thick." The next morning, Malik stood at the iron gates of Maple Hollow, and for a moment he forgot how to breathe. He'd heard about this place his whole life. The old Ellison mansion, the grandest estate in the county. But hearing about something and seeing it were two different things entirely. The house rose before him like something from another era. 3 stories of white-painted brick, with tall columns that held up a second-floor balcony. The windows were floor-to-ceiling on the main level, the kind that would flood the rooms with light. Black shutters framed each one, though some hung crooked now, victims of time and weather. The roof was slate, real slate, not shingles, and even from here Malik could see the ornate iron cresting along the ridgeline. A wide porch wrapped around the entire first floor, its wooden boards weathered but still solid-looking. Rocking chairs sat empty, facing out toward gardens that had once been magnificent. Malik could see the bones of what it had been: curved pathways, stone fountains now dry and covered in moss, flower beds that had become wild tangles of vine and weed. The property stretched in every direction, easily 3 acres, bordered by a wrought iron fence that must have cost a fortune when it was installed. Ancient oak trees dotted the landscape, their branches creating cathedral-like spaces beneath them. Spanish moss hung from their limbs like gray-green curtains, swaying gently in the morning breeze. It was beautiful, hauntingly so. And it was falling apart. Paint peeled from the columns in long strips, sections of the porch railing had rotted through. The gardens were so overgrown they'd nearly consumed the pathways entirely. One of the second-floor shutters hung by a single hinge, creaking softly, but even in decay, Maple Hollow held on to its dignity. This had been a place of importance once. A place where decisions were made and deals were struck. A place that mattered. Malik understood, suddenly, why his grandmother's voice had always carried such strange weight when she mentioned this house. This wasn't just any estate. This was history, power, legacy, and now he was being hired to trim its hedges. Impressive, isn't it? Malik turned to find Nora standing beside him, keys in hand. "Yes, ma'am," he said softly. "I've lived here my whole life, but I've never actually seen it up close. It's sad." Nora finished for him. "It's sad. All this beauty, all this history, just rotting away." She unlocked the gate, which groaned on rusted hinges. The Ellison family built this in 1847, survived the Civil War, survived the Depression, used to host governors and senators. Now it's just one old man, alone with his ghosts. They walked up the long driveway, Malik's work boots crunching on gravel that was half buried in weeds. Up close, the house was even more magnificent, and even more neglected. The front door was a massive thing of carved oak, with beveled glass panels on either side. "The property is 3 acres, Nora explained as she led him around the side of the house. "Start with the front gardens, work your way around. There's tools in the shed, mower, trimmer, rake, use whatever you need." They walked through overgrown pathways. Malik's eyes took in the scope of the work, but also the details. A stone bench, hidden beneath jasmine that had gone wild. A sundial, its bronze surface green with age, the remnants of a rose garden, where a few hardy blooms still fought their way toward sunlight. This place had been loved once, carefully tended. Someone had planted these gardens with intention, with dreams of beauty that would last, and then someone had let it all die. As they rounded the western corner of the property, Nora stopped abruptly. Her voice dropped lower. "This section here," she gestured toward a corner where the vegetation grew even thicker, forming an almost impenetrable wall of green. "You leave alone. Don't cut anything back there. Don't even walk through there if you can help it." Malik followed her gaze. Through the tangle of vines and overgrown bushes, he could just make out what looked like an old iron fence, rusted and partially collapsed. "Why?" The question came out before he could stop it. Nora's jaw tightened. "There's an old grave back there. Mr. Ellison, he doesn't allow anyone near it. Those are his rules. You want the work, you follow the rules." A grave. On private property. Malik had heard of such things, old family plots from before there were public cemeteries, rich folks' privilege, being buried on their own land. "Yes, ma'am, I understand." But as Nora walked away toward the house, Malik lingered for a moment, staring at that forbidden corner. Something about it felt wrong. Not scary, just sad. Like a secret that had been kept too long. Nora's voice broke his thoughts. "People say it's someone who worked here once, long time ago. That's all anyone knows. That's all anyone needs to know." He spent the morning attacking the front lawn, the mower sputtering to life after several pulls. The work was hard but honest, and Malik lost himself in the rhythm of it. Push forward, turn, push back. Watch the wild grass fall away to reveal the earth beneath. Around noon Nora brought him a sandwich and a glass of sweet tea on a tray. "You work like you mean it," she observed. "That's rare these days." "Can't afford not to mean it, ma'am." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Take a break, eat in the shade." As Malik sat under an old oak tree, unwrapping the sandwich, ham and cheese, more generous than he'd expected, he found his eyes drawn to the house, specifically to one window on the second floor. A figure stood there. A man, tall and thin, barely visible behind the gauzy curtain. He wasn't moving, just standing there, looking out, looking down at the garden, looking perhaps at Malik. The figure's posture spoke of something Malik recognized, the weight of carrying something too heavy for too long. His own mother stood like that sometimes, when she thought he wasn't watching, when the pain got too bad, and she forgot to hide it. "That's Mr. Ellison," Nora said quietly. She'd come up behind him without Malik noticing. "He watches sometimes, don't mind him, he doesn't talk much anymore." "How long has he lived here?" Malik asked. "His whole life. This was his family's house, now it's just him." Nora's voice carried a weight of unspoken history. "He used to be different, they say. 40 years ago he was young, social, threw parties, the whole town would come." She paused. "Then something changed. He closed himself off, started drinking, pushed everyone away." "What changed?" Nora shook her head. "Nobody knows for sure, or if they do, they don't talk about it." She glanced at the western corner of the property, then quickly away. "Some things in this town, people decided long ago it was better not to ask about." Malik looked back up at the window. The figure was gone now, but the curtain still swayed slightly, as if it had just been released. He thought about the forbidden grave, about a man who locked himself in his own house, about secrets so old they'd become part of the landscape, and he thought about the $6 an hour he desperately needed. Some questions, he decided, weren't worth asking. Not yet anyway. As he returned to work, Malik didn't notice Nora watching him with a strange expression, something between hope and worry, like she'd just set something in motion she couldn't take back. The sun climbed higher, casting short shadows across the property. In the forbidden western corner, vines rustled in a breeze that didn't touch the rest of the garden. And behind that second-floor window, Henry Ellison poured himself another drink with shaking hands, unable to look away from the young black man working in his yard. A young man the same age as the one he'd buried 40 years ago, the same age as guilt itself. 3 days into the job, Malik had cleared most of the front gardens. The property was beginning to remember what it used to be, flower beds emerging from beneath years of neglect, stone pathways revealed like archaeological discoveries. But it was the silence that struck him most. In 3 days he'd heard nothing from inside the house, except the occasional creak of floorboards, the distant clink of glass on glass. No radio, no television, no phone conversations, just silence, thick and heavy as the humidity. Nora came and went, bringing meals on trays that she carried upstairs. She'd return with the trays barely touched, her expression tight with worry she tried to hide. "He's not eating again," she muttered on the third afternoon, more to herself than to Malik. "Been like this for weeks." Malik paused in his raking. "Is he sick?" In a manner of speaking, Nora set the tray down heavily on the porch railing. "There's sick in the body, and sick in the soul, Mr. Ellison." She trailed off, shook her head. "He's been dying slowly for 30 years, just forgot to actually do it." It was the most Malik had heard her say about her employer. She immediately seemed to regret it, straightening her apron with brisk efficiency. "That's not my business to share, you just keep working. The garden needs you." But that night, as Malik was loading his tools into the shed, he heard it, a sound that made him freeze. It came from an open window on the second floor. Not quite crying, not quite speaking. A voice low and slurred, talking to no one. "Shouldn't have, so young. Didn't mean to. God forgive me." The words were fragmented, broken by what Malik recognized as the thick tongue of someone deep in their cups. His own father had sounded like that, in the months before he left, before the drinking took him away from them completely, first in spirit, then in body. Malik stood in the growing darkness, listening to a stranger's anguish, and felt something unexpected stir in his chest. Not pity exactly, something more complicated. Recognition maybe, the understanding that suffering came in many forms, wore many faces. Poverty wasn't the only prison. The next morning, as Malik trimmed hedges along the east side of the property, the window above him opened with a sharp squeak. Malik looked up, shading his eyes against the sun. Henry Ellison stood there for the first time in full view. He was perhaps 75, though drink and regret had aged him beyond his years. His face was gaunt, unshaven, eyes deep-set and red-rimmed. He wore an undershirt stained with what might have been coffee or whiskey or both, and his hand gripped the window frame as if he needed it for balance. "Yes, sir," Malik replied, respectful but not deferential. He'd learned early that some people tested you with rudeness, waiting to see if poverty made you bow. "How old are you?" The question caught Malik off guard. 20, sir." Henry stared at him. his jaw working as if chewing on words he couldn't quite speak. 20, he repeated, his voice rough. 20 years old. A long silence stretched between them. Malik could hear birds in the trees, the distant sound of a car on the road beyond the property, but mostly he heard the ragged breathing of the man in the window, as if even standing upright required tremendous effort. "What's your name?" Henry asked finally. "Malik Johnson." "Johnson." Henry's eyes narrowed slightly, searching Malik's face as if looking for something specific. "You from around here?" "Born here, sir. Lived here my whole life." Another silence. Henry swayed slightly, caught himself. "Your family? They been here long?" Malik hesitated. There was something odd about the questions, something that felt less like small talk, and more like an interrogation, however gentle. "My mother's family, 3 generations, my father's side, we don't talk about them much." Henry's face did something complicated, a flash of pain quickly suppressed. He nodded once, abruptly. "Work hard, listen to Nora, stay away from the west corner." Then he shut the window, the curtain falling back into place like a final punctuation mark. That evening, Nora found Malik sitting on the porch steps, taking a water break. "He spoke to you." It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." "What did he ask?" "My age, my name, my family." Nora lowered herself onto the step beside him with a soft groan. For a long moment, she said nothing, just stared out at the work Malik had done. The garden was transforming, becoming something beautiful again. But beauty, Malik was learning, could cover a multitude of sins. "That's the most he's spoken to anyone in 6 months, Nora said finally. "The last gardener, he quit after 2 weeks, said the place gave him the creeps. Before that, I hired a boy from the church. Mr. Ellison wouldn't even let him start, sent him away the moment he saw him." "Why?" "Because the boy was 20 years old, and black." Nora turned to look at Malik directly. "Mr. Ellison has complicated feelings about young black men." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Malik felt his stomach tighten. He'd encountered enough racism in his life to recognize it, but this felt different. Not hatred, something else, something more like fear, or guilt. "Should I be worried?" he asked quietly. "No." Nora's answer came quick and firm. "He's not dangerous, not to you, not to anyone but himself." She paused. "He's just haunted." "By what?" Nora stood, brushing off her dress. "That's not my story to tell. Maybe it's not anyone's story to tell anymore. Maybe some things should stay buried." But as she walked back toward the house, she added over her shoulder, "Though I will say this, you being here, working here, it's the first time in 30 years I've seen him look out that window without reaching for the bottle first." Later that night, long after Malik had gone home to care for his mother, Henry Ellison sat in his darkened study, a glass of bourbon in his hand. He hadn't drunk from it yet. That alone was remarkable. Through his window, he could see the moonlit garden, the neat rows Malik had created, the cleared pathways, the care evident in every cut, every trimmed edge. Work done by someone who understood that honest labor had its own dignity. Work done by hands the same shade as the hands he'd destroyed 40 years ago. Henry raised the glass to his lips, then stopped, set it down on the windowsill without drinking. His hand was shaking, but not from need, from something else, something he'd thought he'd buried along with his victim. Conscience. 20 years old, he whispered to the empty room. "God help me." 20 years old. In the corner of his study, barely visible in the darkness, sat a locked metal box. Inside that box lay documents Henry had kept hidden for 4 decades. Documents that would destroy what remained of his life if anyone ever saw them. Documents that named a crime, recorded a theft, marked the place where one man's greed had ended another man's existence. He'd thought about burning them 1,000 times, thought about confessing 1,000 times more. But cowardice was a powerful thing. It could make a man live with murder, it could make him drink himself numb rather than face the truth. But watching Malik work, watching this young man break his back for honest wages, watching him care for a garden that belonged to a monster, something was shifting in Henry, something he'd thought long dead. Shame. Real shame. The kind that demanded action, not just alcohol. "What are you doing to me, boy?" Henry whispered, though Malik was 3 miles away, spooning soup into his mother's mouth, telling her about the big house, and the strange old man, and the job that might, if he was lucky, last through the winter. Neither of them knew yet that their lives were already entwined. that the grave in the western corner was not just a secret, it was a connection. A tragedy that had shaped one man's entire existence and stolen another's before it could truly begin. The moon rose higher, the garden slept, and in the darkness, two men, one young and black, one old and white, both carried burdens they didn't fully understand yet, but they would, soon. The sky was still gray with dawn when Malik arrived at Maple Hollow on the 8th day. He'd developed a rhythm now: arrive early, work hard, leave before the shadows grew too long. The garden was beginning to reveal itself, emerging from decades of neglect. Nora had left a note on the tool shed door: gone to sisters, emergency, back in 3-4 days, Mr. Ellison knows you'll be here. Nin Malik pocketed the note and pulled out the hedge trimmers. He was setting up his tools when he heard it, a dull heavy sound from the western corner, like something falling. Mr. Ellison, Malik called out. No response, just wind through leaves and a distant bird call. His feet were moving before his mind finished deciding. He pushed through overgrown branches toward the forbidden corner, thorns catching his shirt. The vegetation grew thicker, as if the earth itself was keeping people away. Then he saw him. Henry Ellison lay crumpled beside a low stone marker, one arm stretched toward it. An empty bourbon bottle lay on its side, its contents spilled into the dirt. The old man's face was turned toward the stone, eyes closed, breathing shallow. Mr. Ellison. Malik dropped beside him, hands hovering, unsure where to touch. Can you hear me? Henry's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. His lips barely formed words. Couldn't stay away, had to see. See what? Mr. Ellison, you need a doctor. No. The word came surprisingly clear. Henry's hand gripped Malik's wrist with unexpected strength. No doctors, just help me inside. Malik recognized something in the old man's desperate eyes, not just drunkenness, something deeper. A man at the end of something. All right, but if you pass out again, I'm calling someone. He helped Henry up, half carrying him. The old man was lighter than he looked, all bone and regret. They stumbled through the garden together, Henry's breath ragged against Malik's shoulder. Inside, Malik guided him to the study's leather armchair, lowering him carefully. Henry's head lolled back, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on his face. Malik found the bathroom, filled a glass with water, grabbed a washcloth. When he returned, Henry's eyes were closed, but tears still flowed. Malik knelt, pressing the cool cloth to Henry's forehead. The old man's eyes opened, focusing on Malik with painful intensity. I went out there, Henry whispered. To the grave. Haven't been able to in years, too scared, but I heard you working, heard the garden coming alive, and I thought. He swallowed hard. I thought maybe if the garden could be redeemed. He reached for the glass. Malik guided it to his lips. Henry drank deeply, water spilling down his chin. Do you believe people can be forgiven for things they can never fix? The question hung between them. Malik sat back, considering carefully. I think forgiveness isn't about fixing what's broken, he said slowly. It's about living with it honestly, carrying it right instead of carrying it wrong. Henry's eyes widened. How old are you? 20. You talk like you've lived longer. Poverty ages you fast. You learn things early when you have to. What have you learned? Malik thought about his mother, the bills dropping out of school, about responsibility that made boys into men too soon. I learned that graves don't go anywhere, he said. Only the living run away. The words struck Henry like a blow. He covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. His whole body trembled with grief, held too long. Malik sat quietly, bearing witness. He didn't know what haunted this man, but he recognized grief. Sometimes you just had to be present while someone else broke. After a long while, Henry lowered his hands, face raw. Where's Nora? He asked hoarsely. Her sister's having an emergency. Back in 3 or 4 days. Horror crossed Henry's face. 3 days alone. I can call someone. No. Henry laughed bitterly. I don't have neighbors anymore. Just people who pretend I don't exist. Malik studied him. The trembling hands, hollow eyes, the way he kept glancing toward a cabinet where more bottles likely hid. I can stay, Malik heard himself say. Just to make sure you're all right. Make sure you eat something. Henry stared at him. Why would you do that? Because you need someone to, and I think you've been alone too long. You don't even know me. No, but I know what it looks like when someone needs help. My mama taught me not to walk past that. Henry gripped the chair arms, knuckles white.
I don't deserve your kindness. Maybe not, Malik said honestly, but I'm offering it because you need it. There's a difference. Fresh tears filled Henry's eyes. He nodded once, jerky. Thank you. That day became 3 days. Malik cooked simple meals, sat with Henry while he ate, coaxing him to take just one more bite. He found the bottles hidden throughout the house, and poured them out, one by one. Henry went through withdrawal hard. He shook, sweated, paced. Malik stayed up with him, speaking quietly, keeping him grounded. On the second night, Henry asked, "Why did your father leave?" "Drinking," Malik said simply. "Started after he lost his job. Eventually decided it was easier to leave than watch himself fail." "Do you hate him?" "No, I'm angry. But hate takes energy I don't have. I save my energy for taking care of Mama." Henry nodded slowly. "You're a better man than me. I've spent 30 years hating myself, and it hasn't changed anything." On the third day, Henry's hands stopped shaking. He ate a full meal without help, eyes clearer. "Nora will be back tomorrow," Henry said. "You can go home tonight. I'll be all right." At the door Henry called out, "Malik?" "Yes sir."
"That thing you said, about graves not going anywhere. Only the living running away." His voice cracked. "I've been running 40 years. From a grave I put there myself. And you've been working 20 feet from it not knowing." Malik felt something cold in his stomach. "Sir," Henry shook his head, wiped his eyes. "Go home. Tell your mother she raised a good man. Better than I deserve." He closed the door, leaving Malik staring at the house as darkness fell. Walking home, Malik turned over Henry's words. "A grave I put there myself." What did that mean? But he was tired, too tired to think clearly. Tomorrow he'd go back to just being the hired help. Tomorrow things would be normal again. Except nothing felt normal anymore. In his study Henry stood at the window watching darkness swallow the garden. For 3 days this boy had cared for him. Asked for nothing, just stayed. The same boy whose last name was Johnson. Henry walked to his desk, pulled out the locked metal box he'd kept for 40 years. Inside lay documents. And beneath them a confession, the murder of Jeremiah Thomas. A full account. August 15, 1959. He thought of the boy who'd just left. Malik Johnson. It couldn't be coincidence. Maybe judgment had finally arrived, not as police but as a kind young man with his victim's blood in his veins. A young man who just spent 3 days nursing his grandfather's killer, not knowing. "What am I going to do?" Henry whispered to his reflection. "When he finds out." Outside, the garden slept. The grave slept, and the truth waited, patient, inevitable, drawing closer. 3 days after caring for Henry, Malik returned to his regular work schedule. The old man seemed better, still quiet, still watching from windows but no longer drinking. At least not openly. Nora had returned from her sister's, bustling around the house with renewed energy. She'd noticed the change in Henry too. "Whatever you did," she told Malik one morning. "It helped him. He's eating again, talking a little. It's like he remembered he's still alive." Malik just nodded, unsure how to explain those 3 strange days. The intimacy of caring for someone at their lowest. The weight of unspoken things hanging between them. He'd been avoiding the western corner since finding Henry collapsed there. Something about that place unsettled him. Not just the grave itself but the feeling that surrounded it. Secrets buried deeper than bones. But today as he worked on the southern flower beds he kept glancing toward that forbidden section. The vegetation had grown even thicker since he'd crashed through it to help Henry. Wild and tangled, like the earth was deliberately hiding something. Finally curiosity won. Malik gathered his tools, machete, clippers, rake, and approached the western corner. If Henry wanted it left alone he would have said something after Malik had already been back there. The old man's silence felt like permission, or maybe resignation. The work was harder than he expected. Vines thick as his wrist had wrapped around everything. Thorns from wild roses tore at his arms. Decades of growth created layers, brambles over ivy, over honeysuckle, over God knew what else. But slowly, the space revealed itself. The iron fence was more extensive than he'd thought. Not just a small plot, but a proper enclosure, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. Someone had cared about this grave once. Had wanted it protected, marked, remembered, and then they'd let the forest swallow it whole. Malik cleared away the last of the heavy vines and knelt before the stone marker. His hands worked carefully, pulling away moss and lichen that had accumulated over decades. Letters emerged slowly, Worn by weather, softened by time, but readable. First just one letter. J. Malick's heart began to beat faster. He scraped more carefully, working around the edges of the carved letter. Below it, partially hidden by a thick patch of moss. 1959. Nothing else. No full name, no birth date, no comforting Bible verse or beloved or rest in peace, just a single letter and a year. This wasn't a family grave lovingly tended. This was something else. Something hidden in plain sight. Malick sat back on his heels staring at the marker. The simplicity of it felt wrong. Felt like shame made stone. He pulled out his phone and took several photos. The marker, the fence, the layout of the small enclosure. Then he texted Ray, "Need you to look something up. Grave at Maple Hollow, just marked J 1959. Looks like the kind of burial black folks got when white folks wanted them gone but not found." Ray's response came quickly. "On it. Might take a day or two to search records from that far back." Malick started to put his phone away, then texted again. "Also check missing persons from that year. Something feels off about this." He stood looking at the grave with new eyes. Someone had died here. Been buried in secret, or at least in silence. Given a marker just substantial enough to mark a spot, but vague enough to hide an identity. Who was Jay? And why hide them here? On the Ellison property, behind layers of deliberate neglect. Malick thought about Henry's words 3 days ago. "I went out there, to the grave. I haven't been able to in years." A grave the old man couldn't approach without falling apart. A grave he'd forbidden anyone to tend. A grave that seemed to radiate guilt like heat from sun-baked stone. Behind him a voice, "You found it." Malick spun around. Henry stood at the edge of the cleared area, leaning heavily on a walking stick. He looked pale, older than his 75 years, but his eyes were clear, sober. "Mr. Ellison, I didn't hear you. I've been watching you work." Henry gestured toward the grave with the stick. "Watching you uncover what I've been hiding for 40 years. Something cold settled in Malick's stomach. "Who's Jay?" Henry didn't answer immediately, just stared at the marker like it might speak for him. When he finally looked at Malick, his eyes were full of something Malick couldn't name. Grief, maybe, or fear. "Go home, Malick. Please, just go home." "Mr. Ellison, I'm not ready." Henry's voice cracked. "I thought I was, but I'm not. I need time." He turned and walked back toward the house, moving like every step hurt. Malick watched him go, more confused than ever. That night, lying in bed, Malick couldn't stop thinking about that single letter, J. So simple, so deliberately vague. His phone buzzed. "Ray, found something. Call me." Malick stepped outside onto the small balcony of their apartment, not wanting to wake his mother. "What did you find?" "Missing person report from August 1959. Ray's voice was tight. "Black male, age 20. Last seen heading to Maple Hollow Estate to meet with landowner about property dispute." Malick's chest tightened. "Name? Jeremiah Thomas." The world tilted. Malick gripped the balcony railing. "Malick, you there? That's my grandfather." The words came out strangled. "Thomas was my mother's maiden name. Her father, Jeremiah Thomas, disappeared before I was born. My grandmother died never knowing what happened to him." Ray swore softly. "Jesus, Malick. Are you thinking?" "I'm not thinking anything yet. Just," Malick tried to breathe normally. "Just tell me what the report says." "Not much. He went to Maple Hollow to discuss land ownership. Never came home. Wife filed a missing person report. Local police did a cursory investigation, found nothing, closed the case after 6 months. Listed as probable abandonment." "Abandonment?" Malick laughed bitterly. "That's what they always said about missing black men back then. Easier than actually investigating. There's more. The land dispute was over 20 acres on the east side of the county. Jeremiah claimed the Ellison family had defrauded his father out of it years earlier, had documents proving it. And then he vanished." "Yeah." Malick looked toward Maple Hollow, invisible in the darkness but weighing on his mind like a physical presence. "Ray, that grave. The one marked J. What if? Don't say it yet. Not until we know for sure." But Malick already knew. Deep in his bones, in the way Henry had looked at him, in the guilt that dripped from every corner of that property, he knew. His grandfather wasn't missing. He was buried 20 feet from where Moloch had been trimming hedges for 2 weeks, and Henry Ellison knew exactly where the body was, because he'd put it there. For 2 days, Moloch went through the motions, showed up at Maple Hollow, did his work, avoided the western corner and Henry both. He couldn't look at the old man without feeling rage building in his chest, hot and dangerous. But he also couldn't prove anything. Not yet. A single letter on a gravestone wasn't evidence. It could be anyone, could be coincidence. Except Moloch didn't believe in coincidences anymore. He'd told his mother he found some old land documents at work, asked her about her father's missing property. She'd gotten quiet, then pulled out a shoebox from her closet, the one that held her mother's few possessions. Inside, faded photographs, a wedding ring and a single piece of paper. A land deed dated 1928, listing 20 acres purchased by Thomas Washington, Moloch's great-grandfather, and a letter from 1959, from a lawyer, stating that the land had been legally transferred to the Ellison family. Mama said Daddy was going to fight it. Sarah had told Moloch, her voice hollow, said the transfer was fraudulent, that he had proof. He went to Maple Hollow to confront them, and she couldn't finish. Now Moloch stood in the garden at Maple Hollow, rain beginning to fall, staring at the house. Henry was in there somewhere, drinking again probably, running from a truth that was closing in like storm clouds. The rain came harder. Moloch should leave, get home before it got worse. But something made him stay, some instinct that tonight mattered. Around 9 o'clock, he saw it. A light moving in the darkness. A flashlight, bobbing toward the western corner. Moloch's pulse quickened. He moved toward the light, rain plastering his shirt to his skin. The beam illuminated Henry, wearing a rain slicker, carrying a shovel. He was heading directly toward the grave. "Mr. Ellison," Moloch called over the sound of rain. Henry spun around, the flashlight beam catching Moloch's face. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Two men in the rain, a secret between them that was about to break open. "Go home, Moloch." Henry's voice was barely audible over the storm. "What are you doing with that shovel?" "Go home." But Moloch was already moving closer. "Are you trying to move him? Cover it up better." "What?" "I'm trying to fix it." Henry's shout cut through the rain. "I'm trying to mark it properly. To give him a real stone, one with his full name. I ordered it weeks ago and it finally came and I thought," he gestured helplessly at the shovel, "I thought I could do it myself. In the rain. In the dark. Like the coward I am." Moloch stopped a few feet away. "Give who a proper stone." Henry's face crumpled. The shovel fell from his hands. "You know, you already know. I can see it in the way you look at me now. Say it." Moloch's voice was hard. "Say his name." "Jeremiah Thomas." The words came out like a confession pulled from deep inside. His name was Jeremiah Thomas. He was 20 years old, and I killed him. The rain pounded down, washing over both of them, but neither moved. "How?" Moloch's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. "He came here in August of '59. Had documents proving my father stole his family's land through fraud. He was respectful, calm, just wanted what was rightfully his." Henry's words came faster now, like a dam breaking. "But I was drunk. Young and stupid and drunk. We argued. I pulled my father's gun to scare him. He stepped toward me, said I wouldn't shoot him over land that wasn't even mine. And the gun, it went off. Accident or murder? I don't know." Henry's voice broke. "I've spent 40 years trying to decide. My finger was on the trigger, but did I mean to pull it? Was it rage or reflex? Does it even matter? He died, and I panicked." Moloch felt like he was watching the scene from outside his own body. "You buried him here. That night, dug the grave in the dark, just like I was going to fix it in the dark tonight, because I'm still a coward, still hiding." Henry sank to his knees in the mud. "I forged papers making it look like he'd signed over the land, then disappeared. Everyone assumed he'd abandoned his family, and I let them think it. My grandmother died, believing her husband left her. I know, my mother grew up thinking her father didn't want her. I know." Henry's shout was anguished. "Don't you think I know?
Don't you think I've thought about them every day for 40 years? About the wife and baby he left behind. About the life I stole. Malik took a step closer. Why did you hire me? Did you know who I was? Not at first, but when Nora mentioned your mother's maiden name, I knew, or suspected. Henry looked up at Malik, rain and tears mixing on his face. And I thought maybe this was the universe giving me a chance, to make amends, to help his grandson at least, to do something right. So you let me work on my grandfather's grave. Let me clear the weeds around the place where you murdered him. Malik's voice rose despite himself. What kind of I wanted to tell you. Henry struggled to his feet. That day you found me collapsed here. I'd come to confess, to show you the grave and tell you everything. But I couldn't get the words out. And then you took care of me for 3 days and I saw the kind of man you were and I thought. He laughed bitterly. I thought maybe I didn't deserve to feel better by confessing. That living with the guilt was my punishment. That's not your choice to make. Malik was shouting now. Justice isn't about your feelings. It's about truth. About my family finally knowing what happened. Thunder cracked overhead. Lightning illuminated both their faces. Young and old, accuser and accused. You're right. Henry's voice went quiet. You're absolutely right. Come with me. What? Come inside. There's something you need to see. Something I should have given you weeks ago. They walked to the house in silence, both soaked through. Inside, Henry led Malik directly to the study. He opened a wall safe behind a painting, pulled out a metal box. Everything. Henry set the box on the desk with shaking hands. The original land deeds showing your great-grandfather as the rightful owner. Documents proving my father's fraud in 45. My own confession about what happened to Jeremiah. I wrote it 10 years ago but never had the courage to send it. He opened the box, spread papers across the desk. Malik saw his family's name on faded documents, saw Henry's handwriting on newer pages, a full accounting of the murder of Jeremiah Thomas. The land is yours, always has been. I have transfer papers already drawn up, my lawyer has them. The moment you want them filed, they're filed. Henry's hands trembled over the documents. As for me, I'm turning myself in. Tomorrow, I'll go to the sheriff, confess everything. Show them where to find his body. Why? Malik's voice was raw. Why now? Why not 10 years ago when you wrote the confession? Why not 40 years ago when it happened? Because I was a coward. Because I chose my comfort over justice. Because, Henry met Malik's eyes. Because until you showed up I'd forgotten what it felt like to be human. You reminded me. And humans have to face what they've done. Malik stared at the papers. At 40 years of lies documented and finally exposed. His grandfather's land. His grandfather's murder. All of it laid out like evidence in a trial that should have happened decades ago. My mother, Malik said quietly. She deserves to know before the police do. She deserves to hear it from me. Yes, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her. Henry's voice broke completely. Tell her Jeremiah was brave. That he came here fighting for what was right. That he was a good man who died because of my weakness. Malik gathered the documents with careful hands. I'm taking these. Tomorrow morning I'm telling my mother. And then I'm going to the police whether you turn yourself in or not. I understand. At the door Malik paused. That day I found you by the grave. You said you went there because you heard the garden coming back to life. You said maybe if the garden could be redeemed, maybe I could be too. Henry finished. But redemption isn't about feeling better. It's about doing what's right, no matter how much it costs. You taught me that. Even though it's 40 years too late. Malik walked out into the rain, clutching the documents that would destroy what remained of Henry Ellison's life, and finally give his grandfather the justice he died seeking. Behind him, Henry stood in the lit doorway, a silhouette of a man who'd finally stopped running. The storm raged on, but something had shifted. Truth long buried was finally surfacing, and there would be no more hiding from it. Malik didn't sleep that night. He sat at the small kitchen table in his apartment, the documents spread before him, reading his grandfather's story in faded ink and legal language. The land deeds showed everything. How his great-grandfather had bought the property piece by piece between 1888 and 1920. How William Ellison had convinced him to sign partnership papers in 1945, papers that were actually transfer documents. How Jeremiah had gathered evidence of the fraud, had proof that would have held up in court. And then there was Henry's confession, 10 pages, handwritten, detailing every moment of that August day in 1959. The argument, the gun, the panic, the burial, the forgery, the 40 years of guilt. At dawn, Malik's mother emerged from her bedroom, saw him still at the table, and knew immediately something was wrong. "Baby, what is it?" So Malik told her everything, about the grave marked with a single letter, about Henry's confession, about how her father had died fighting to reclaim their family's stolen land. Sarah's hands shook as she picked up the confession, reading her father's name over and over. Tears fell onto the paper, smudging 40-year-old ink. "He didn't leave us," she whispered. "He didn't abandon me. No, Mama. He loved you. He died trying to give you a future." She sobbed then, 40 years of wondering and hurt finally breaking. Malik held her while she cried, both of them grieving a man they'd never really known but had always carried. When the tears finally subsided, Sarah looked at her son with red-rimmed eyes. "What happens now?" "Now we go to the police. We tell them where to find Granddaddy. We get him buried properly, with his name on the stone. Malik gathered the documents, and we make sure everyone knows the truth. And Mr. Ellison, he says he's turning himself in this morning." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Good. Let him face what he did. Let justice finally happen." They drove to the sheriff's office at 8 a.m., Ray meeting them there. But before they could go inside, a patrol car pulled up. Henry Ellison stepped out, flanked by 2 deputies. He kept his word. He saw Malik and Sarah, stopped. For a moment the 2 families faced each other across the parking lot, killer and victim's kin, separated by 40 years and a crime that couldn't be undone. Henry walked over slowly, his hands trembling. He looked at Sarah, opened his mouth, closed it. What could he possibly say? "Mrs. Johnson," he finally managed. "Your father was a good man. He came to my house seeking justice, and he couldn't finish. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I know nothing will ever be enough, but I'm sorry." Sarah stared at him, her face hard. "Did he suffer?" Henry flinched. It was quick. "He didn't suffer long." "Did he know why? Did he understand what was happening?" "I don't know. Everything happened so fast. You had 40 years to remember." Sarah's voice was ice. "You had 40 years to think about every detail. So tell me, did my father know he was dying because of land? Because some drunk young fool couldn't face the truth?" "Yes." Henry's voice broke. "Yes, he knew. His last words were about the land, about how it belonged to his daughter. To you." Sarah's composure cracked. Fresh tears fell. "He was thinking of me, even at the end." "Yes, ma'am, he was." Ray stepped forward. "Mr. Ellison, let's go inside." But Sarah spoke again. "Wait." She looked at Henry directly. "I want you to know something. When they bury my father properly, with his real name on his grave, you're not invited. You don't get to be there. You don't get to grieve him, or seek forgiveness at his funeral. You understand me?" "Yes, ma'am, I understand." "Good." She turned away. "Now get him out of my sight." Inside the sheriff's office, Henry gave his full statement. Sheriff Morrison, who'd been a young deputy in 1959, sat across from him with a tape recorder running. "You're confessing to the killing of Jeremiah Thomas on August 15, 1959. "Yes, sir." "And you buried him on your property, in the western corner?" "Yes, sir. About 30 feet from the property line, near the old oak tree." Morrison looked at Malik and Sarah, who sat in chairs against the wall. "And you've turned over evidence proving the Ellison family defrauded the Thomas family out of 20 acres of land?" "Yes, sir. All original documents are here, along with forged transfer papers I created after Jeremiah's death." Morrison shook his head slowly. 40 years. You kept this quiet for 40 years. "Yes, sir. To my shame." "Why confess now?" Henry glanced at Malik, because I was reminded what integrity looks like, and because I'm too tired to keep running from the truth. Morrison stood. Henry Ellison, I'm formally arresting you for the murder of Jeremiah Thomas, for improper burial of human remains, for fraud, and for obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. I waive my rights. I'll answer any questions you have. Even so, Morrison continued the Miranda rights. When he finished, he nodded to the deputies. Take him to holding. We'll need a forensics team at Maple Hollow. As they led Henry away, he looked back at Malik one final time. The garden, at the house. Would you make sure someone tends it? Don't let it die again. Malik didn't answer, just watched as the man who killed his grandfather was finally taken into custody. By noon, news had spread through town. Reporters gathered at Maple Hollow as forensics teams began excavating the western corner. Nora stood on the porch, crying, watching the house she'd managed for decades become a crime scene. Malik arrived with Ray, needing to be there when they found his grandfather. Sarah had stayed home. She couldn't bear to watch. The excavation took hours. Careful work, documented and photographed. And then 3 feet down, they found it. Human remains. Bones that had lain undisturbed for 40 years. Evidence that Henry Ellison had been telling the truth. The coroner confirmed. Male, early 20s, consistent with the time period, and lodged in the bones of the upper chest, a bullet. Jeremiah Thomas had been murdered just as Henry said. As they carefully removed the remains, Malik stood at the edge of the police tape, watching his grandfather emerge from the earth at last, watching justice, delayed for 40 years, finally arrive. Ray stood beside him. You okay? I don't know what I am. Malik wiped his eyes, relieved, angry, sad, all of it at once?
Probably all of it. That's normal. Nothing about this is normal. They watched in silence as the coroner's van drove away carrying Jeremiah Thomas to finally receive a proper burial, to finally be identified, acknowledged, mourned. That evening, as the sun set over Maple Hollow, Malik walked through the garden one last time. Nora had told him he didn't need to come back, that she understood, but he'd wanted to see it. The garden he'd restored, the place where his grandfather had died, the place where truth had finally broken through decades of lies. He stood where the grave had been, now just an empty hole in the ground. Soon it would be filled, grassed over, forgotten, but Jeremiah Thomas wouldn't be forgotten. Not anymore. Malik pulled out his phone, called his mother. Mama, they found him. They're bringing him home. Sarah's sob echoed through the line. Thank you, baby. Thank you for finding him, for bringing him back to us. He never left us, Mama. We just didn't know where he was. Now we do. Now we can say goodbye properly. As Malik walked back to his car, he passed the house where Henry Ellison had lived for 75 years, where he'd imprisoned himself with guilt, where he'd drunk himself numb rather than face the truth. The house looked different now, not grand or mysterious, just empty, a shell where a man had wasted his life, rather than do one brave thing. Malik got in his car and drove away from Maple Hollow, not sure if he'd ever return. Behind him the house stood silent in the fading light, its secrets finally exposed, its long shadow lifted at last. 6 months later, Henry Ellison stood trial for manslaughter. The courtroom in the county courthouse was packed. National media had picked up the story, a 40-year-old murder, a deathbed confession, stolen land, racial injustice. It had everything that captured public attention. But for Malik's family, it was simply painful. Justice requiring them to relive their grief publicly. Malik sat in the front row between his mother and great-aunt Phyllis, who'd flown in from Atlanta. She was 78 now, Jeremiah's older sister, one of the few people still alive who remembered him. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. The murder, the burial, the forgery, the 40 years of cover-up. They called forensics experts who confirmed the bullet trajectory, medical examiners who estimated time of death. Then they called Nora Whitfield to the stand. Mrs. Whitfield, you managed the Ellison estate for how long? 35 years. And during that time did Mr. Ellison ever mention Jeremiah Thomas? Not by name, but he talked about the western corner, about the grave. He wouldn't let anyone near it. He'd get drunk and stare out the window at it for hours. Did he seem remorseful? He seemed destroyed, like a man carrying a weight that was crushing him. The defense attorney stood. So my client was already punishing himself. Objection, the prosecutor said. Relevance. I'm establishing that Mr. Ellison has suffered consequences. Sustained. The judge looked at the defense attorney. Mr. Ellison's guilt or lack thereof is not determined by his drinking habits. Next question. After Nora came Ray Parker, who testified about the missing person report from 1959, about how it had been barely investigated, filed away, forgotten. Deputy Parker, why wasn't the case pursued more aggressively? Ray's jaw tightened. Because in 1959, a black man going missing after meeting with a wealthy white landowner wasn't a priority for local law enforcement. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Are you saying there was racial bias in the investigation? I'm saying there was no real investigation. And yeah, I think we know why. The prosecutor nodded. No further questions. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. The prosecutor called Sarah Johnson to the stand. Malik watched his mother walk up, her back straight despite her illness. She'd insisted on testifying, despite his concerns about her health. Mrs. Johnson, tell us about your father. Sarah's voice was soft but steady. I never knew him. He disappeared 2 months after I was born. My whole life I was told he probably abandoned us. That's what people assumed about black men who went missing back then. What did your mother tell you? That he was a good man, that he worked hard, that he loved the land his father had bought, 20 acres that represented everything our family had overcome, and that land was stolen from us. Sarah's eyes flashed. In 1945, William Ellison, the defendant's father, tricked my grandfather into signing transfer papers. He couldn't read well, trusted that the papers were what Ellison said they were. By the time he realized the land was gone, and your father tried to get it back. Yes, he spent years gathering evidence, letters, documents, witness statements. He had proof that the transfer was fraudulent. He went to Maple Hollow to present that evidence. Her voice cracked. And he never came home. What did your family do? What could we do? We had no money for lawyers. The police barely looked for him. We were poor black folks, and the Ellisons were wealthy whites. We all knew how that would end. How did you feel growing up, believing your father had abandoned you? Sarah's composure finally broke. Like I wasn't enough. Like if I'd been more important to him, he would have stayed. It wasn't until my son found his grave that I learned the truth, that my father died trying to give me a future, that he loved me enough to fight for what should have been mine. The prosecutor let that sit for a moment. Mrs. Johnson, the defendant has returned the land deeds to your family. Does that make a difference? He returned stolen property. That's not generosity, that's the bare minimum. Sarah looked directly at Henry for the first time. You didn't just take land, you took my father from me. You let my mother die thinking her husband abandoned her. You stole 40 years of truth from my family. Giving back the deeds doesn't fix that. No further questions. Henry's lawyer approached carefully. Mrs. Johnson, my client has expressed deep remorse. 40 years too late. He's confessed, is facing justice, because he got caught. If my son hadn't taken that job, hadn't found that grave, your client would still be sitting in that house, keeping his secrets. Sarah's voice rose. Don't talk to me about remorse. Remorse is what you feel when you can't live with what you've done. Your client lived just fine for decades. The lawyer had no response. He returned to his seat. The next witness surprised everyone. The prosecutor called Phyllis Thomas. Malik's great-aunt walked slowly to the stand, her age showing but her mind sharp. After being sworn in, she looked directly at the jury. I was there the day my brother left for Maple Hollow, August 15, 1959. I was 17 years old. Tell us about that day. Jeremiah was nervous but determined. He had a folder of documents, proof that the Ellisons had stolen our land. He'd spent months preparing. He believed in justice. Her voice turned bitter. He was 20 years old, still young enough to think the world was fair. What happened when he didn't return? We searched, called police. My sister went to Maple Hollow. The defendant's father claimed he'd never seen Jeremiah, threatened to have her arrested for trespassing when she insisted. Phyllis's hands gripped the witness stand. We knew something happened at that house, we just couldn't prove it. The prosecutor asked gently, can you tell us about the land, what it meant to your family? Phyllis's expression softened. Everything. My grandfather, Jeremiah's grandfather, was born enslaved. After freedom came, he worked as a sharecropper for 20 years, saved every penny. In 1888 he bought 5 acres, poor land, rocky, but it was his. She leaned forward, speaking directly to the jury. Do you understand what that meant? A man born as property, owning property. It was freedom made real. He worked that land, made it productive, bought 5 more acres in 98, 5 more in 03. By 1920 he had 20 acres of good farmland. It represented everything our family had survived, everything we'd overcome. And then, William Ellison took it, used legal tricks and illiteracy against an old man who trusted him, took 20 acres that had been bought with 20 years of saved pennies and broken backs. Phyllis's voice hardened, and when my brother tried to get it back, his son killed him and buried him like trash. Objection. Henry's lawyer stood. Inflammatory, sustained. Mrs. Thomas, please stick to facts. Those are facts. Phyllis shot back. My brother was murdered. His body was hidden. His name was dragged through mud for 40 years. Those are facts. The prosecutor nodded. No further questions. Henry's lawyer stood, but seemed uncertain how to proceed. Mrs. Thomas, you say the land meant everything to your family. Now it's been returned. It's not returned. It's released. 40 years late. Phyllis's eyes blazed. That land should have passed from my grandfather to my father to my brother to his daughter. Instead it sat with people who had no right to it while my family struggled. You call that justice? My client is trying to make amends. Your client is trying to die with a clean conscience. There's a difference. Phyllis leaned forward. Amends would have been confessing 40 years ago, facing justice when he was young enough to actually serve a full sentence, not waiting until he's an old man with nothing left to lose. The lawyer sat down, having gained nothing, and in the end Henry paid the price, spending the rest of his life behind bars for what he had done. 2 years after the trial, Malik stood at the edge of what had once been Maple Hollow's western corner. The estate had been sold, turned into a community center and public garden. The new owners had asked Malik to help design the space, and in the spot where his grandfather had been buried, they'd created something beautiful, a memorial garden. A bronze plaque read, Jeremiah Thomas Memorial Garden, in honor of all who fought for justice and never saw it. 1959, forever remembered. Around it, fruit trees grew, apple, peach, pear, vegetable beds where community members could plant and harvest, benches where people could sit and rest. A place of life built on ground that had held death for too long. Today was the dedication ceremony. Malik's mother sat in the front row, stronger now, breathing easier. Aunt Phyllis beside her, Ray and his family, Nora, who'd retired but came to honor the memory. And in the back row, alone sat Marcus Williams, the young man Henry had taught to garden in prison. He'd been released 6 months ago, and Henry had written to Malik asking if Marcus could visit the memorial. Malik had agreed. The mayor spoke about justice and healing. A local pastor gave a prayer, and then Malik was called to the stage. He stood before the crowd, nervous but determined. My grandfather died in this spot 66 years ago, he began. He came here seeking justice, and he found violence instead. He was buried in secret, his name dragged through mud, his family left to wonder and grieve. He paused, looking at his mother, who nodded encouragement. But truth has a way of surfacing. My grandfather's story was hidden for 40 years, but it didn't disappear. It waited, and when the time came, it emerged, not as revenge, but as restoration. He gestured to the garden. This place used to hold secrets and shame. Now it holds vegetables and fruit trees. It feeds people. It brings communities together. It teaches children where food comes from, and how to make things grow. His voice grew stronger. That's what justice looks like, not just punishment, but transformation, taking places of pain and making them places of life. He looked directly at Marcus. My grandfather believed people deserved second chances. He helped folks who'd made mistakes. So it seems right that this garden, this memorial to him, should also be about new beginnings. Malik pulled out a small packet of seeds. These are heirloom tomato seeds. The same kind my great-grandfather grew on the 20 acres he bought after slavery ended. The land that was stolen. The land my grandfather died trying to reclaim. He held up the packet. But the thing about seeds is they don't care about the past. They only care about good soil, water, sunlight. Give them what they need,
and they'll grow anywhere, even in places where terrible things happened. He invited everyone forward. Let's plant these together. Let's make something grow. The crowd dispersed into the garden, planting seeds in the prepared beds. Children laughed, running between rows. Elders shared gardening tips. Marcus worked quietly in a corner, his hands gentle with the seedlings, remembering what he'd learned in prison from a man seeking redemption too late. As the sun began to set, Malik found himself alone at the memorial plaque. He knelt, touching his grandfather's name. "We did it, Granddaddy," he whispered. "The land came back to us, your name is cleared, and now this place where you died, it's helping people, feeding people. That's what you would have wanted, isn't it?" A shadow fell across him. Malik looked up to see Marcus standing there, hat in hand. "Mr. Johnson, I'm Marcus Henry, Mr. Ellison, he taught me in prison." Malik stood, extended his hand. "I know, he wrote about you, he told me what he did to your grandfather, and he told me how you responded, with truth, but also with, I don't know, humanity, I guess." Marcus looked at the plaque. "I'm in prison for armed robbery, hurt people, took things that weren't mine, and I was angry about it, felt like the world owed me something." He swallowed hard. "But Henry told me about your grandfather, how he worked hard, saved money, bought land fair and square, how it got stolen anyway, how he died trying to make it right. And Henry said, that man had every reason to be angry, but he came seeking justice through proper channels, with dignity, with hope that the system would work." Marcus met Malik's eyes. "It didn't work. The system failed him. But you didn't become bitter. You didn't seek revenge. You just made sure the truth came out, and then you built something good from it." "I didn't do it alone," Malik said quietly. "My mother, my family, we did it together. Still, you could have just taken the money from the land and disappeared. Instead, you're here, building a garden, teaching people, honoring your grandfather's memory the right way." Marcus gestured at the memorial. "That's what Henry wanted me to see, that real strength isn't about power or revenge. It's about making things grow." Malik studied the young man. "What are you going to do now?" "Got a job at a landscaping company, learning the trade. Henry taught me the basics, but I want to learn more. Maybe someday have my own business." Marcus smiled slightly. "Henry said your grandfather would have given someone like me a chance, that he believed in second chances." "He did. My grandmother told my mother that he helped men coming out of trouble, gave them work when no one else would. So I guess I'm asking," Marcus took a breath, "would you give me a chance to help with this garden? Volunteer work, no pay. I want to be part of something good, something that makes up for the bad I did." Malik considered. This young man, trying to build a better life from a broken start, seeking redemption the hard way, through work, through service. "Yeah," Malik said. "Yeah, we could use the help. Come by Saturdays. We've got a lot of planting to do." Marcus's face lit up. "Thank you. I won't let you down. Just show up and do the work. That's all anyone can ask." As Marcus walked away to rejoin the volunteers, Malik's mother approached. "That was kind of you," she said. "Granddaddy would have done the same." "Yes, he would have." Sarah slipped her arm through Malik's. "You know, for years I thought the worst thing about losing my father was not knowing what happened to him. But I was wrong." "What was the worst thing?" "Not knowing who he was, what he stood for, what kind of man he'd been." She looked at the garden, at the people planting and laughing, and building something together. "But now I know. He was the kind of man who fought for justice, who believed in doing things right, who thought about future generations, not just himself." She squeezed Malik's arm. "And he'd be so proud of you, of this garden, of how you handled all of this, the truth, the trial, the anger. You honored him better than any gravestone ever could." Malik felt tears prick his eyes. "I just tried to do what seemed right." "That's exactly what he did, and look where it led to you, carrying on his legacy, making sure his death wasn't meaningless." Sarah smiled through her own tears. "The land came back to us, the truth came out, and now his name is teaching people about courage and justice. That's not a bad ending to a story that started so terribly." "It's not an ending though, is it?" Malik looked at the young trees, the planted seeds, the children running between rows. "It's a beginning, for all these people learning to grow things, for Marcus trying to build a better life, for everyone who'll eat food from this garden." "You're right," Sarah looked at her son with pride. Your grandfather planted seeds he never got to harvest, but they grew anyway. Through you, through this garden, through everyone his story touches. She paused, then added, that's the thing about truth, baby. You can bury it, hide it, try to kill it, but if it's planted in good soil, it'll grow eventually. Might take 40 years, but it'll grow. That night, Malik received a call from the prison. Henry Ellison had died in his sleep. Heart failure, they said. Peaceful. He was 78 years old. Malik felt nothing at first, then something complicated. Not grief, exactly, but not satisfaction either. Just a sense of something ending that had needed to end. The prison chaplain said, he wanted me to tell you something if he passed. He said, tell Malik the garden taught me that you can't plant new seeds until you've cleared the old weeds. Tell him thank you for helping me clear mine. Malik thanked the chaplain and hung up. He stood at his window, looking out at the darkness, thinking about an old man who'd spent 40 years drinking himself to death, and 2 years in prison finally learning to live. His phone rang again. Marcus, Mr. Johnson, I just heard about Henry. I wanted to see if you were okay. I'm fine. Are you? Yeah, I mean he was the closest thing to a mentor I had in there. He taught me a lot, but I know what he did to your family, so I don't want to act like, Marcus, it's okay to grieve him. He helped you. That was real, whatever else he did. A pause. Can I ask you something? How did you do it? How did you talk to him, write to him, after what he did? Malik thought carefully. I didn't forgive him. I need you to understand that. What he did to my grandfather, to my family, that's not mine to forgive. But I recognized that he was trying, finally, to do something right, and I couldn't let my anger stop him from that. Does that make sense? Yeah, it does. People are complicated, Marcus. Henry was a murderer. He was also a man who taught you to garden, and told you to build something good with your life. Both things can be true. I'm going to keep working at the memorial garden. If that's still okay, it's still okay. Henry would have wanted that. After they hung up, Malik sat in the darkness, thinking about justice and mercy, and the strange tangled ways they intersected. Henry Ellison had died in prison, paying for his crime, but he'd also died having finally told the truth, having taught a young man to build instead of destroy, having funded a garden that would feed people for years to come. Was that redemption? Malik didn't know, wasn't sure anyone could answer that, but it was something, and sometimes, something was enough. 3 months later, on what would have been Jeremiah Thomas's 86th birthday, the Memorial Garden held its first harvest festival. Hundreds of people came. They picked tomatoes and peppers, learned about composting and crop rotation, shared recipes and stories. Children played in the shade of young fruit trees. Elders rested on benches dedicated to loved ones lost. Malik walked through the rows with his mother, both of them marveling at what had grown from such painful ground. Marcus was there, leading a workshop on organic pest control. He'd become the garden's volunteer coordinator, showing up every Saturday without fail, teaching others what Henry had taught him. A group of high school students was filming a documentary about the garden's history. They'd interviewed Malik, his mother, Aunt Phyllis. They'd researched the 1959 murder, the 40-year cover-up, the trial, and they'd concluded their film with a simple message. Truth, however delayed, still matters. As the sun set and the festival wound down, Malik found himself standing once more at the memorial plaque. Someone had left fresh flowers. Someone else had planted marigolds around the edges. His grandfather's name, once hidden for 40 years, was now read by hundreds of people every week. His story, once buried, was now taught in local schools. His legacy, once stolen, was now feeding communities. Malik thought about all the ways a life could echo forward, how pain could transform into purpose, how death could ultimately serve life. He thought about Henry, alone in prison, teaching a young man to garden, about Marcus, using those skills to rebuild his own life and help others, about seeds planted by hands that would never see the harvest, growing anyway, because that's what seeds do when given good soil. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother, who'd gone home early. Your grandmother appeared in my dream last night. She was young, smiling. She said, tell my Jeremiah I finally know the truth. Tell him his baby girl is okay now. Thought you should know. Malik smiled, tears blurring his vision. He didn't necessarily believe in signs or spirits, but he believed in peace, the kind that comes when questions finally have answers, when stolen names are restored, when families can grieve properly and move forward. Rest easy, Granddaddy, he whispered to the plaque. Your fight is over, but the garden keeps growing. 5 years later, Malik stood in cap and gown, accepting his master's degree in environmental science and community development, his thesis From Tragedy to Transformation, How Community Gardens Can Heal Historical Wounds. His mother sat in the front row, healthy now, her lungs clear for the first time in years. The land money had paid for treatments, for a home with clean air, for a life she'd never imagined possible. Aunt Phyllis was there too, now 83 but still sharp. She'd lived to see her brother's name cleared, his memory honored, his legacy celebrated. That was enough, she said, more than enough. After the ceremony, Malik's advisor pulled him aside. I've got an opportunity for you. The state is funding a program to create memorial gardens on sites of historical injustice, lynchings, destroyed black neighborhoods, forgotten cemeteries. They need someone to direct it, someone who understands both the horticulture and the healing. I recommended you. Malik's heart quickened. Direct the whole program. 20 sites across Georgia to start. Could expand nationally if it works. You'd be designing gardens, training communities, helping people transform painful histories into living monuments. The advisor smiled. It's exactly what you did at Jeremiah Thomas Garden, but on a larger scale. Malik thought about his grandfather, about the garden that bore his name, about all the seeds that had been planted there, literal and metaphorical. Thought about Marcus, now a paid groundskeeper with plans to study landscape architecture, about the hundreds of families who'd harvested vegetables there, who'd learned about their history while tending tomatoes and greens. When do I start?
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.